Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kishore Chetri, and I am from Bhutan. First of all, I would like to thank the committee of CICME 2020 for giving me the opportunity to participate in this international conference on mentoring educators that's being held in Cambodia under the bannership of National Institute of Education. Thank you very much for that. And my presentation for this evening is going to be on preparing teachers for inclusive education in Bhutan. And the findings in this presentation is based on my PhD studies that I completed last year in 2019. And I would like to begin my presentation by giving a brief background about the location of Bhutan. As you can see here, Bhutan is located in southeast of China, towards the south of China, and it is also surrounded by India in the east, west, and south. So this is a very small kingdom, a very small country in the Himalayas. The geography and the population of Bhutan, as I said, Bhutan is a small country. The total land area is about 38,000 square kilometers, and the population is a little less than 800,000 people. And the ratio, if you look at the percentage of male and female, we have 52% male and 42% female. This is based on the report from National Statistics Bureau of Bhutan, produced in 2018. And we have a student population of 167,000 students. And the primary enrollment rate of Bhutan is 96.8%. And when I say this, the remaining group of children are mostly located in remote areas of Bhutan, in the nomadic communities. There are also some migrant populations and children with disabilities who are still not being able to attend schools. The education of Bhutan can be basically categorized into three different areas: the monastic education, formal education, and the non-formal education. Well, the modern education or formal education actually came to Bhutan only in the early 20th century. Prior to that, the form of education that was practiced in Bhutan was totally monastic education. And when we had these formal or the modern schools coming up in Bhutan, it was basically curriculum that was borrowed from India. We had teachers coming to teach in Bhutan from India, and most of these schools were Hindi medium schools, meaning that the national language of India was the medium of instruction in Bhutan. So it was only later in 1976 when the first national education of Bhutan was drafted, then education was formalized in the schools. We have two teaching colleges in Bhutan, the Paro College of Education and Samsi College of Education. And these colleges offer BA Bachelors of Education courses and postgraduate diploma in education, and Master of Education courses. Now, coming to the point of talking about inclusive and special education in Bhutan, Bhutan is yet to formally introduce uh, teachers courses in special needs and inclusive education. That's why there have been studies, there have been reports, there have been researches which state that training of teachers for inclusive and special education has been a weak point in Bhutan. So that is still a challenge that Bhutan has to overcome, although Bhutan has been doing. So this is still going on. And just this year, 2020, the Paro College of Education has started Master of Inclusive Education. So prior to that, we only had a very simple module called the Special Education module that was being offered to the teacher trainees. So that was sort of a basic uh, information or basic introduction to special needs. Now, inclusive education, the history of inclusive education in Bhutan, the first school that came up in Bhutan was in 1973, which was a school for the visually impaired children. Thereafter, the first inclusive school came up in the year 2002, which tried to enroll students who had some sort of learning difficulties. And as of 2019, there are 18 inclusive schools spread across Bhutan. There still remains a lot of challenges, like in many other places. In Bhutan, we have challenges of teachers who are lacking skills in special needs and inclusive education as well. And one of the reasons was that, as I said earlier, we did not have full-time courses in inclusive education. So that was one of the things that did not really move forward in terms of educating children with special needs. The other thing was lack of resources for teaching, lack of funds to implement special education and inclusive education. And also, there was an absence of inclusive education policy. So that was another hindrance that did not really come very forward in terms of education for children with special needs. Now, what has happened and what's going to happen, or what's next to be done in order to address the needs for implementing inclusive education effectively? Now, these are some of the things what really motivated me to look into my research. It was my own interest. One of the things was the outcome of my master's degree, in which I had also tried to look at the concerns and experiences of school teachers teaching in special schools. So that led me to do more further research. And it is also timely with the Bhutanese government's efforts in trying to expand inclusive schools. And also, it is found that we do not have much research in this area. So that was one reason why I was interested in moving forward with my research in PhD. And it is also to provide information about practice and realities in which inclusive education can help pre-service training colleges. And finally, it is also with the hope that I would be able to make some little bit of contribution towards the inclusive education programs, inclusive education projects spread across South Asia, where we are really working together, I think, we have similar sort of problems in these countries. Now, in order to do that, I had these three research questions that was the main driving force behind my research. What understandings do pre-service and beginning teachers have about inclusive education when we talk about the context of Bhutan? The second was, how do pre-service teachers and beginning teachers perceive teacher education program in Bhutan as preparation for teaching in inclusive schools, inclusive classrooms? And the third one was, how do individual pre-service teachers demonstrate self-efficacy to teach in inclusive classrooms? And to do this, I had my literature review looking at three different aspects. The first one was to look at the overview of special educational needs and inclusive education across the globe, which basically talked about, in which I tried to cover history, social movements, legislations, declarations, acts, and what were some of the obstacles to inclusive education. The other one important was to look at teacher education degrees, how inclusive education was being incorporated into the teaching colleges. And in order to do these, I also I had my theoretical framework, tried to I had based my theoretical framework on two different theories. One was Bandura's theory of self-efficacy, and other one was Vygotski's theory of social culture. Now, in order to do this research, I found that a descriptive case study was very convenient, because this looks at the ground realities, practicalities in the ground. A case study allows you to really look at what's happening in the ground, look at the participants' views. So that's why a case study was adopted to take care of this. And in order to do that, I had used open-ended questions, classroom observations, and I also employed focus group interviews. So that was the best thing to do, especially in a qualitative study research. And in order to do that, I had included 6 inclusive schools where pre-service teachers were undergoing their teaching practice. And in these schools, there were also some teachers who had just graduated from their teaching colleges, and it was best to look at their experiences as well. Then research participants, I had 12 pre-service teachers who participated in focus group and classroom observations, and 20 beginning teachers who participated and expressed their views through open-ended surveys questionnaires. The data collection, as I said, there were 2 different types of focus groups interviews, 15 questions that addressed research question 1 and research question 2, and 20 open-ended questionnaire addressing research question 1 and 3. The questionnaire comprised of 20 questions, and 20 beginning teachers were covered under open-ended questionnaire. 16 classroom observations were made in which the pre-service teachers participated. And for data analysis, the interview transcripts, field notes, and responses to questionnaires were repeatedly reviewed, read to understand the data, and open coding was used, creating notes on key patterns, concepts that emerged from data were sub-themed. The themes were created. And data, as I said, um, was collected from different sources. And so I had focus group interview data, I had classroom observation, and I had open-ended questionnaire. So from the focus group interviews, 4 themes were developed. There were 4 themes, and under each theme there were 2 or 3 sub-themes. So this helped to gather participants' views and was able to address research question 1 and 2. Similarly, results from classroom observations were also taken into account, and 2 themes were developed from this, and each of the theme had again 2 or 3 sub-themes. Likewise, the open-ended questionnaire had 3 themes, and under each again there were 3 or 4 sub-themes. Now, you must have noted that I have just briefly talked about my earlier slides because I wanted to focus more on my findings of the study. So that's why I did not very much elaborate on my themes and sub-themes or the literature review, because as I said, I wanted to focus on my findings. So because I wanted to give what actually is happening in the field, what actually is required, or what actually can be done. So that was the main point here. So I just sorry for that. Now, again, as I told you, like I based my study on 2 different theories. The first one was the 2 theoretical lenses. As I said, the first one was based on Key's social cultural theory, and which provided cultural and environmental interpretations of participants' thinking, development, and performance based on their classroom interactions. Social cultural theory is very much relevant to inclusive education as it recognizes the uniqueness of individuals in terms of culture and ability to learn. This theory highlights the role of social experience, observational learning, and the interaction between developing people and culture in which they live. So this was very important theory. That's why especially in classroom observations, this was taken into account. And as this theory clearly states about the relationship between culture and society and the learners. So this theory was taken into account. And the second theory was Bandura's self-efficacy theory, which is also very much relevant, especially in terms of teaching. When it comes to teaching, this is very, very much applicable, Bandura's theory, which defines as belief in one's own capabilities to recognize and execute the course of action required to produce given attainments. And as we know that Bandura has 4 key sources of self-efficacy theory: mastery experiences, vicarious experience, verbal persuasion, and emotional cues. So while trying to understand the opinion, the perceptions of the participants, these two theories were taken into account to see how teachers were being prepared, how teachers understood, or how teachers performed in the classrooms. Now, if you look at the discussion, you'll see that on the basis of qualitative information from the data findings, we have these findings. The first one is perception and understanding about inclusive education. The results from this study indicate that there are often a disconnect between the training and qualification of teachers and inclusive education practice. So this has been repeatedly found by many studies that the relationship between schools and the teachers has there has been a big gap, because especially in case of Bhutan, inclusive schools have been established before teachers were trained. So that was one of the biggest challenges. So many schools came up, but teachers were not prepared. Schools started to roll on, and teachers were struggling. Teachers were trying to learn. Teachers were trying to practice on the job. So that was one challenge. So the findings from this study revealed that lack of preparation can be effectively addressed by comprehensive training and preparedness of all teachers in the implementation of inclusive schools. So that was one of the common things raised by most of the participants, because most of the participants who were contacted felt that they were not well prepared to work in inclusive classrooms. So that was one of the biggest challenges. And the other thing was attitude towards inclusion of children with special educational needs. Now, especially in terms of education for children with special needs, um, participants across the schools in Bhutan were very welcoming to children with disabilities. There was not much of an issue with attitudes towards children with special needs. However, the, both pre-service and beginning teachers indicated that there were drawbacks questioning the equity of delivering educational context in such a scenario. So elements such as curriculum and pedagogy issues, behavioral problems were expressed by these participants. The other thing was challenges in implementing inclusive education. Now, there are always challenges when talking about inclusive education. For example, barriers to inclusive education and policy for inclusion. Uh, Barriers to inclusive education mostly comprised of um, physical barriers, in which students were thought to be struggling to learn in the classes, because due to teachers' inability or teachers' incompetence to handle children with special needs. Other barriers included challenging behavior of students and unsupportive environment, both within and beyond the school setting. So these were some of the things described by them. And the policy for inclusion, while most of the schools had their own policy, um, it was not within the scope of the study to really look into the policy of the schools, because different schools had their own policies, so it may not have been a common policy. And policy for inclusion in Bhutan is still in its draft form. The national policy for inclusive education has not is not formalized, so schools have not been able to really follow on this, and the participants have been expressing their eagerness to learn about the policy for inclusion. This is what they have expressed. Then the other one was the first one, as I said, was addressing research question 1, and then the second one was to address research question 2. And in this, the participants expressed their experiences in two forms. They did express some positive experiences that they picked up from their training college. They also had some negative experiences that they picked up from their teacher education as well. And they also expressed some challenges in teaching in inclusive classrooms when they were undergoing their teaching practice. So, some of the positive things that they found was that although the module was an introductory program, they found that it was still useful to them because they had picked up some skills, a little bit of skills. They had picked up some knowledge about inclusive education, some knowledge to teach children with special needs. So these were some of the things that they thought were useful to them. And the negative experiences that they described, that they narrated, was they were not fully oriented about the teaching strategies, which was quite confusing to them, they said. And they also felt that the duration of training was short for them. The module that they were learning was really short because I think it was just spread over just one semester, and then they thought that could be spread over. They thought that could be a little longer. That was one of the things that they said. Now, challenges in teaching
Sorry.
in inclusive.
Sorry, doctor, you have one last minute to finish your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah. And challenges, as they said, they were not able to support children who had behavior problems. And again, due to their inadequate training, although they had training, they felt that it was not really enough for them. They were not prepared well. That's what they said. Well, then based on this study, some of these recommendations have been made to enhance training and development of teachers, enhance policy and practice, including with community, improve teaching and learning materials, better articulation of duties and responsibilities for teachers, and transforming class size. And also future research in this area. I thought that maybe it would be good to see how training and development of teachers can be enhanced in the training colleges, in addition to in-service teachers who are already in the schools. Then also to explore how principals and special needs coordinators implement inclusive education in their schools. And most importantly, I think one of the most group of stakeholders that is being left out is the community. So we thought community and parent participation could be must be involved. Parents and community should come forward so that school can prepare collectively for the betterment of the children. So, well, this is the end of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation, Dr. Chatri, on the topic of inclusive education in Bhutan. And also thank you very much for your presentation. I am pretty sure that this presentation would be useful for our audience. So because of time constraint, we could not answer the question that have been dropped in the chat box. So let us sorry for that. So the rest question would be answered in the forum. So thank you so much, Dr. Chatri, for your presentation
Thank you.
today.